I'd like to welcome to the stage our next speaker. Now, Falko Boecker is actually representing JoyPac, who's the sponsor of this track. So, if we like Falko to the stage. Hi.
Hey Dave, how are you?
I'm very well. How are you doing?
Good. Ready to go.
Great. Well, look, I'm going to retreat into the background. What we'll do is we'll hand over to you. You're going to give a talk about Hypercasual in 2021, West and East.
That's right.
If anyone in the audience has questions for Falko, please drop them into the Q&A box. I'll come back at the end. Take your time, Falko. We're doing okay for time this morning. I'll come back at the end and help curate those questions for you. But in the meantime, I'll fade into the background and take it away.
Perfect. Yeah, let me start by sharing my screen. Thanks, Dave, and welcome to the Hypercasual in 2021 West and East talk. This is the talk where we look into our crystal ball, maybe just the magic 8-ball, to kind of see what is going to happen in this year. Maybe it's just like what I think or we at JoyPac think is going to happen in this year. But yeah, let me get right to it. Quickly, to get this out of the way, my name is Falko. I'm coming up on 14 years in the games industry, and since 2016, I'm purely doing mobile games, but I've always been around partially mobile games, always free to play since the beginning. And I'm at JoyPac. I'm the senior publishing manager, so I'm kind of the first contact for developers from like meeting me at conferences, digital or in person, signing the contract, but also post that I'm pretty much the person that as a studio you will talk to, at least one of the people that you will talk to at JoyPac. I'm a gamer through and through. I don't differentiate between any console, PC, mobile. I love all kind of gaming. My favorite game is Shadow of the Colossus. If you haven't played that, check that out. But a little bit about JoyPac, so you understand a bit our background, where I'm coming from with a lot of these opinions, is we are a hyper-casual publisher, solely focusing on mobile hyper-casual games. We have offices in Beijing and Copenhagen, the Beijing office being slightly bigger. Originally, we came from transforming Western games to the Chinese market, adapting them, releasing them, advertising them there. But these days, we're a fully global publisher. We have more team members across Europe and Asia, mostly to be in direct contact with the developers there. Overall, we have about 150 million downloads over our whole portfolio. We had multiple games on the top 1 download charts on iOS, both in the US and China. So for us, we try to take a real global approach. But then it's hyper casual, so it's not about just a single game. So we had more than 10, I think we're coming up on 15 games that reach top 50 positions in either one market or the other. I'm not counting anything double that managed to do that in both markets. Talking a little bit about 2021, we have to take a look back at 2020 because I think there are a bunch of trends that already started that we're going to see continue towards this year. But first, I want to address something that actually happened at the end of 2019, where there were a bunch of people that says, oh, this is it for hyper casual, right? The CPIs are rising. It's getting more competitive. There's no way this is going to continue. It's just companies pushing money around to each other. No real money comes into the ecosystem. And the games really have to change in a major way to bind people long enough to make back those CPIs. But then that is definitely not what happened in 2020, right? 2020 was a crazy year for mobile gaming. Downloads doubled in Q1 2020 compared to what we saw in the last quarter of 2019. And in March, we had like a record-breaking week of globally 1.2 billion downloads of mobile games. And hyper-casual games continue to be a strong, big part of that. Of course, this is partially due to the pandemic that helped, to put it that way, with people try to look for a distraction, right? You're stuck at home, and a free snackable mobile game is, of course, a perfect way to kind of distract yourself, spend a little bit of time doing something else. And that is one of the main reasons why we saw across a lot of digital media, but mobile games specifically, a huge uplift in download, specifically through the February-March period. It peaked a bit, and then depending on the country, it went back down, not down to the previous levels we had in 2019, and depends a bit on the country how fast it tapered off. But we are still at a pretty healthy level for downloads, and hyper casual went through that year without any major problems. I would say it continued to a large part, like 2019, even grew through that uplift, it didn't lose any share, like percentage-wise, I would say. But what we saw in 2020 is that the quality bar is still rising for hyper-casual games. If you think way back, 2017, 2018 maybe, I saw a lot of hyper-casual games that were very simple, right? Very simple 2D graphics sometimes, or if it's 3D, simple geometric shapes, anything that's fast to do. And after that, we saw more and more production values go into these games. I think these days doesn't really matter what any kind of experience that you can have at home that's somewhat satisfying. You can put 3D after it, look at it at the App Store, and you'll find something that has a realistic depiction of that hobby or thing that you do in 3D, in beautifully rendered 3D. But coming to 2021, there are a couple of topics that I want to talk about. And I want to start with IDFA because it's still right now on everybody's mind. For people that don't know, IDFA is the identifier for advertisers, which on iOS platforms allows you to identify users very specifically across different apps and environments. And that helps you to advertise towards specific players that you're trying to get to. And there is an update announced that this IDFA will not necessarily be removed, but whenever an app will use it, the user will get a pop-up and will be asked if he wants to be tracked, because it's a move for more privacy from advertisers in your mobile ecosystem. And we suspect, as many others, that 90% of players at the very least will say no to this kind of tracking. It's already possible in iOS, but you really have to dig into some menus to get there. So the question is, how will this affect hyper-casual games? I personally think it will not be a huge impact right away because of the kind of targeting we do in hyper-casual. The way hyper-casual gets these super low CPIs is, of course, simple, very easy to understand gameplay, but also kind of relying on a very wide audience and metaphors that are picked up by pretty much everybody around the world, or at least in one geo. And when you're aiming at male, female, 18 to 65, you don't really care about like finding specific whales like a mid-core game or even more advanced casual games would, right? So the direct impact in our UA, I think, will be fairly minor at first, because we'll still continue to, across hyper-casual as a whole, not only JoyPac, continue to aim our marketing as wide of a target audience as possible. However, the problem is a secondary one, because will the ad money go away with the IDFA tracking? Because I mentioned before, one of the criticisms of hyper-casual is that there's a lot of money pushed between different publishers. If I advertise a game for another hyper-casual publisher, I make money by showing that ad. The user starts playing his game, and then I'll pay that publisher to show my ads. Eventually, this will run out and not work. There needs to be fresh money coming into the system. And mid-core games, more advanced puzzle casual games are usually where this money comes from. So if those guys are hit by this IDFA change a lot and they don't spend a lot of money, the amount of money that you can make by showing ads to your players will go down significantly. And then you have to see, can you adjust for that? Is it possible to compensate with brands or other ways? Or do you have to change the games themselves to be ready to keep people around a bit longer, to pretty much higher the LTV, the lifetime value of your users? One of the things that I think companies will deal with this, or try to deal with this, is more targeting through creatives. So also heard this in some great panels during the conference, that if you can't look for a specific player type through the programmatic portion before, when it picks who's showing the ad to, then you can maybe do that through the creatives, the videos, the ads that you show to the people themselves, by presenting gameplay in a specific way that is especially appealing to the people that you want to join your game. Maybe it becomes less attractive to twist games a little bit. Sometimes you see games that really don't work the way that they look in the ads, and it's going to be interesting to see if that still works, because in general that's good if you have a good pre-selection, because the more of that pre-selections download the game, it doesn't really matter if the game is not exactly what they're expecting. But we have to see if this still is true in an environment where you have to target really wide. And I think this kind of advertisement targeting through creatives, at least some of the techniques that are used there, could trickle down towards hyper-casual publishers as well. So they use that a bit more once that experience spreads throughout the user acquisition community. Android might become a new battlefield as well. We already see a few publishers of mid-core and more advanced puzzle games, casual games, moving over to Android, because right now they're trying to find like a second base, or at least kind of trying to figure out that market more. So if IDFA goes away on iOS, that they can prepare or are already prepared of making some money and more money in that ecosystem to kind of like account for that. And it's going to be interesting to see if hyper-casual publishers then follow the money, because as I said, they need this other environment to live off. They're not that great at surviving by themselves. So if all the money moves over to Android, you might see a lot of hyper-casual publishers focus a little bit more on the Android market that they did before, at least until Android implements the same privacy restrictions. So there's already rumors that Google, who are very involved in the marketing process, of course, so it's not something that they're gonna be the first and foremost company to implement something like that, but there are rumors that they will follow suit after Apple implements those changes, because they need people to be in the Google and Android ecosystem. So having people perceiving Apple as the main, this is the privacy based, like if I want my private data connected and not be hassled by advertisers, I going Apple. I don't think that Google will let that happen for a very long time. It's pretty likely that eventually they will implement a similar system, and then it depends on how well are you already set up in Google to kind of protect yourself, or maybe you have learned how to do business on Apple without the IDFA by the time that Google implements it as well. So it gives you maybe a little bit of a time buffer. When it comes to general trends, I think we'll see a lot of small trends and very few big trends. Not everything is going to be hybrid casual, right? That's what we heard last year. I remember Pocket Gamer London in early 2020, the last still physical conference I attended. I met a friend from a different publisher, and he said, hey, this was really Archero, the conference. Like every second game I saw was an Archero clone. And we didn't really see a lot of Archero clones high in the charts, or other games that I would describe so much as hybrid casual as that game is. So like very advertisable core mechanic, but then very in-depth RPG systems, item systems and stuff like that built around it. We see a lot of these things in small parts coming up in hyper-casual games, because people want to keep people a little bit longer, raise the LTV a little bit, but it's not like the whole genre suddenly completely changed. We saw all kinds of different trends that rise and fall, kind of like the tides. 1 week, it's all about games with babies or pregnancies in them. The other week, it's about word trivia games. We see a lot of changes, and I think those are going to continue throughout this year as well. And the big change this year is you have to be faster to ride on those waves. For a while, it was possible to just look at the charts, see what was rising through the top 50, 20, 10, and make a game, not copy a game, but make something that was similar in setting and theme, maybe in core mechanic, and put a spin on it. And you could have very good success with that. But these days, these trends are jumped on so extremely quickly. Every developer we work with, when we put out a prototype, we generally get, or the developer gets 2-3 contacts by other publishers saying like, hey, we saw that you're testing this prototype, it looks interesting. Can we work on this together? And they're getting very sophisticated, following the right accounts, using the right tools to keep track of that. And then either they work with that developer or they start putting out their own prototype. So it was not rare for us to have a prototype that tests very well. And while we're working on the game, we see 2 very similar prototypes from other publishers popping up. So I think if you want to participate in these small trend periods, you're going to have something that is similar. You have to have something that is already being worked on before that game really climbs to the top of the charts. What we see though with those things, I think, will be metric-driven trends, kind of like part of the Archero things that we saw. It is something that we've seen throughout the history of hyper-casual. One example is that we have everything level-based now. Very rarely you see endless games, which used to be just the norm for almost every hyper-casual games, because it's just a good opportunity to show ads, right? You don't want to stop the gameplay flow just randomly in the middle and show a person an ad, or even the option to watch a rewarded ad. Most cases, people won't do that. until the end of like a session, or at least of that level that they're playing, right? And I think we're going to see a lot of these trends. So a lot of little things that people implement to either increase playtime or retention to keep people around a little bit longer and maybe watch a few more ads. One thing, and we did this in a game recently as well, is to have like a battle royale or Fall Guys-esque kind of tournament setup where multiple levels are connected through like a meta message. Even if that's not really what is happening technically behind the scenes, that can be very helpful to keep people around. So I'm expecting a lot of these trends, especially when we see some of the shakeups like IDFA happening, to accommodate for that a little bit. Then Asia, of course, for us as a mainly Chinese company is extremely important because it's also still a growing market, right? We see the Western market very competitive, almost saturated, but in Asia, you don't see that many hyper-casual games in the charts, but you see more and more and more. It's not like the West where we see more than half of the top 20 being hyper-casual, but every fourth game, at least in China, Korea, Japan, right now is a hyper-casual game. And we expect that to grow more and more throughout the years. But we also expect the local competition to rise to that. We have a few publishers, us included, that have been working mostly with Western developed games, but we also did a lot of Japanese developed games in China, for example. And we see a lot more developers from the region picking up on hyper-casual as something they could be good at. And right now, I would say they're finding their own style of hyper-casual games, things that are twists on established hyper-casual games, but specifically for the Asian market. One example I have here pictured is our game Tofu Girl by Usaya in Japan. And yeah, it's a fairly known mechanic. It's like a stack game. You jump this little girl up the tofu. And you would say like 2D graphics, tofu. I can't really see that being big in the West. And you'd be right. It was relatively successful for us in the West, but in the APAC region, the game has over 20 million downloads for us. It was extremely successful there. We're very happy with it. And it shows kind of like how people adapt local things to local topics that people there understand to get the same interest that you would in the West, right? Because hyper-casual games are often based on things that everybody kind of understands. So after a while, we expect those studios then to mature to topics that are more global, that are more aimed at people around the world. And then developers will have a bit more competition for Asia, for the Western market as well. There's one big sort of Damocles, if you want, in China right now, which is the ISBN number. It's something that's required for all games that have in-app purchases in them. It used to be only Android. It wasn't enforced on iOS until a few months ago. It basically means that you need a government license to publish any game that has in-app purchases in it, and getting this license is a long, partially expensive process that can take 6 to 12 months to launch a game. And right now, everything that's purely ad-based is excluded. So hyper-casual games can very successfully operate in the Chinese market outside of that system, or in that gray zone that they happily occupy. But there are some rumors that the government is now looking at extending this to purely ad monetized games. And of course, that would be a very big blow in the Chinese market specifically, which is a huge market on par with the US market for potentially for any given hyper-casual games. So that is something to watch out for if that's going to happen. And I want to talk a little bit about like closer cooperations between companies. A trend that we already started seeing in 2020, we did it with our Hyperfuel program, is to set up longer relationships with developers, right? Rather than picking one game, but we still see that publishers looking for that one game with the good KPIs. But we see a lot of publishers now forming longer lasting relationships with developers where they take on some of the risk involved in financing these games, and testing multiple prototypes in succession, right? And we did that with a studio called Umami Games from Denmark recently, very successfully over a few months. The process just improved from prototype to prototype until last week. We had ABC Runner reach the top 1 charts in the US. That is not just a one-off success. That was months of work of like improving from prototype to prototype, getting better and faster working together to get to this point. And we don't expect it to end there. We think that we'll now be able to recreate the success with the studio. And we have other studios that we have this relationship with. So I think there are going to be some what we would call superstar studios, like teams that are really thought after, that have a couple successes under their on their belt, where publishers will try to get these relationships very specifically with these studios, which might make it more difficult in 2021 for new and upcoming hyper-casual studios to find a partner, at least for a partnership like that that's a bit more reliable, because people will be looking for whoever can produce hits on a more consistent basis, because hyper-casual publishers want and need consistent output of new games, because the games are not living extremely long in the App Store like other genres would. And I think eventually this will tip over into more internal studios with a lot of publishers. So either by building new studios completely or acquiring studios that they already have a working relationship with. And we're already seeing that and started seeing that in 2020 more and more. And I think that's a trend that will intensify during 2021. So to close it out, I don't think hyper-casual is going anywhere. We have a couple of potential shakeups, IDFA and Google's reaction, China's ISBN regulation, but hyper-casual is set up to evolve and adapt to these changes. And that's what it's always done. If you look at hyper-casual now versus 2 years ago, it is now very different, but it's not like it suddenly became something a completely different genre. It just adjusted in little elements. And I think this is something that we're going to continue seeing. The genre will keep changing, and you have to keep up to date with it. You have to find creative solutions for problems, or just to improve the games overall. And yeah, that is what I think we're going to see through 2021. And that is it for me. If anything like this sounds interesting, you want to get in touch, feel free to send me an email at falko@joypacgames.com, and happy to get back to you. I'll also try to hang out in the Discord a little bit. And yeah, good luck with your hyper-casual games in 2021.
Thank you very much, Falko. Round of applause from all of us here. As you say, I think the last event that I went to was London in 2020. So that's probably when I saw you last. So hopefully we'll get back to that soon. But in the meantime, you'll have to imagine everyone giving you a round of applause. We've got a few minutes before our panel comes on, and I can see there's 6 questions here. So do you mind taking some of these, perhaps, if I put this to you? So let's dive in here. We've got an anonymous attendee asks, in Android specifically, do hyper-casual... I guess the question here is, so the question is, do hyper-casual do user acquisition in APAC countries like India? Are they seeing positive return on ad spend here? I'm gonna guess that's a question about territories. What do you make of that?
Yeah, so India is becoming more and more interesting to a lot of companies. It's not high on our priority list yet, because I mean, we come from a purely Asian standpoint. Now we expanded into the US quite successfully. So high on our list are now some major European countries, right? German versions, French, Spanish, Italian versions, and so on. And potentially the South American market, but it's becoming more and more interesting. And I see a lot of hyper-casual publishers starting to launch their games there. It's also an extremely active scene for hyper-casual development. So what we're seeing is a bunch of good developers with very high quality games from there. And I think that can be a big advantage, because they understand that territory. And usually when people ask me like what to avoid in games, is not making games for another territory that you want to be in, right? If you're a European studio, don't make a game for the Chinese market, because there are better Chinese studios that understand that market better. And I think that is where a lot of potential lies with the Indian market specifically, because those studios understand hyper-casual games very well. So they have a bit of a head start.
No, that's great. Thank you. So another attendee asks, will hyper-casual UA depend more on source bidding in the future? Is it enough for scale?
Yeah, I'm not a UA expert, so I'm not 100% sure. But header bidding is something that was kind of like a buzzword in 2020, and you see a lot of networks switch over to that. So I think it's going to spread even further, but I'm not deep enough in that to kind of say how much that would work with the IDFA changes and some other changes we're going to see in 2021 specifically.
That's interesting. Thank you. So another attendee asks, what is the Southeast Asia market like for hypercasual, iOS and Android? Are there any trends there in Southeast Asia?
I don't think there's any kind of like game specific. Is still something that I maybe forgot to mention. Right now, most of the hyper casual games that are big in these markets, including China and Japan and Korea, are Western developed hyper casual games. Right. So the same game that you see popular in the stores in the West is usually also pretty high in the Asian market, and that's still the case in Southeast Asia. There's also, again, a very active development scene. I think a lot of areas that you didn't really have on your ticket for like big console productions, or even like some of the bigger mid-core productions, they just thrive in hyper casual, right? Vietnam has become a hotspot, but we see cool stuff coming out of Malaysia and Singapore as well. So I think partially similar to India, with the advantage that usually English goes in a lot of these countries as well. So you see a lot of games that come out there. We'll see some studios that will make use of the knowledge of the area and the culture there to have games that specifically appeal to those players.
Just before we move on to our next question, while we're talking about territories, someone's asked about Latin America as well, countries like Brazil. Is that a growing market for hyper casual? What's the ROI like there?
Yeah, I mean, it's I don't think it's like, again, it's like the highest on the list, but you can cover a lot of people with a Spanish and Portuguese version of a game. So yeah, I think it's interesting by the amount of people alone. It's not the strongest iOS market traditionally, as far as I'm aware, but with Android being more and more of a trend in hyper casual, I see that growing quite significantly. It's definitely a market that most hyper casual publishers don't just leave out or anything like that. It's still worth going into them a little bit and optimizing your UA for it a little bit.
I was interested actually myself, just something that you said during your talk about how publishers can be quite proactive in seeking out developers in this area. It was interesting that you said that our first speaker of the day spoke a little bit about developers approaching publishers with their games that they're developing, whereas you actually implied that there's the traffic goes another way sometimes, that hyper-casual publishers are keeping their eye out on what's being tested and are seeking out developers. Is that common?
Yeah, I think it goes both ways. Definitely will get contacted by a lot of developers as well. But that goes to those superstar studios that I mentioned, where people like really zone in on studios that they saw like either had a couple of successes, and pretty much every hyper casual publisher opens every single hyper casual game to see which logo pops up, because often that's the easiest way to find out who developed the game, or people that they worked on prototypes in the past and thought it was very interesting, but maybe the studio wasn't quite there yet, or it just didn't have that one idea, specifically when publishers were looking only for the single game. And then they started following all their App Store accounts of every single employee that has one, to see whenever something is pushed live, to get a quick glimpse at that, discuss, hey, should we get this from those guys, or should we make something ourselves, to kind of see as early as possible what's going on in the market. And there are a couple like websites and even Instagram channels now that are made to like show, hey, these are the prototypes being tested, right. And people like see trends coming up there as well.
That's interesting. Actually, talking about types of game, I know that we spoke a lot about iOS and Android apps, and I know what JoyPac's speciality is here. But someone's asked a question: why aren't hyper-casual studios leveraging Facebook more as a gaming platform? It has a huge potential built-in reach. What do we think about Facebook as a place for gaming?
Yeah, I think iOS is still the dominating platform. Facebook is mostly used as a user acquisition channel here. Right. There are a couple other channels overall that are interesting. The same goes for HTML5 in Asia, for example. Platforms like WeChat's mini games platform, or other similar platforms that are usually being used by hyper-casual publishers as well, but it's the third biggest one, right? It doesn't work as well as it used to be for Facebook specifically. They're not really pushing their games channels as much as they used to, and it's a bit more difficult, and the market is just smaller. So the focus usually lies on iOS. That's why you see everybody testing iOS US specifically first. We also do China and a couple other ones, but then you spread out from there. Because you have so limited time, you're not going to do a global launch on all platforms everywhere. You focus on the biggest ones, because if everybody else sees your prototype and is working on the same thing, you have this pressure of like, from idea to releasing the game, if it's more than 2 months, you might be in trouble.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is it for those who maybe have just joined this conversation. I see here in the Q&A, someone's asked the question if we can define hyper casual a little bit, a hybrid casual a little bit, and so on. So I just thought it'd be worth talking about some of those for a second. Yeah, of course, one of the things about hyper casual games and hybrid casual games is that they're iterated very fast, right? It's about very quickly getting to market with a very simple idea, isn't it? That's at the core of what we're doing here.
For sure, yeah.
So actually, talking of which, we've got a question here from one anonymous attendee asking, so what about the minimum daily active user and the minimum number of days that you think is needed to test ROI?
I think you need at the very least 100 installs per day. Everything under that, just like even over that, even up to 1,000, sometimes you can see wildly different results on different days. But 100 users a day and then testing on a consistent basis. So not testing weekends with one test, weekdays with another, Christmas with the third, should give you a good impression. If you do 4 or 5 days with 100 players a day, your retention data will be somewhat reliable. That's the absolute minimum.
Right. No, that's great. Thank you. Well, look, I think we're kind of coming up to the end of the time. I don't know whether we've got. I think we're going to have to move on. We've gone a little bit over time. We've got our next panel lined up. So I'm going to just thank again, Falko. Thank you very much. Round of applause from everyone here. Really, really great talk. Really, really insightful insight into what's going on in hyper casual. Thank you very much. And everyone, stick around if you have further questions for Falko. Discord, Meet to Match, and your email was there at the end of the presentation. So thank you very much. We'll move on.
Thank you, Dave. Yeah.